Welcome to the Investor Fireside Chat featuring family offices. This session is organized by Life Science Nation. My name is Claire Zhang, and I will be moderating today's discussion. This session is proudly sponsored by ShareVault, and I will be inviting Mike Liccardo from ShareVault in a bit to briefly talk about how ShareVault's platform helps support the life science ecosystem. And I'd also like to thank the wonderful panelists today, Catherine Hill-Ritchie, Rob Paliwoda, Subra Zain, and Brian Grulk. These are all active family office investors, and I look forward to learning from today's discussion, and I hope the audience does the same. And before we get to the main discussion, so I would like to briefly introduce our firm, Life Science Nation. I know a lot of you are already familiar with what we do, but just so that we're all in context, I promise to make this very quick. And so I'll get into the introduction right away. So Life Science Nation is a Boston-based firm. We're dedicated to providing services to help connect early-stage life science companies with investors and strategic partners. And so a lot of people actually recognize us for the RESI conference series that we organize. So RESI stands for Redefining Early Stage Investments. We have been organizing these conferences for many years now. It is an early stage life science and healthcare investment focused event. So our sweet spot is a Series B. And so some of the events that we regularly organize, we do organize events in various locations, roughly around 5 times a year. But we organize RESI JPM during JP Morgan Week in San Francisco every January, as well as RESI Boston in September. And so we strive to provide a platform that really helps connect these two groups, the startups and the investors, and facilitate meetings, and as well as reconnecting with existing connections and so on. What's interesting though is that Allison actually started as a database company. So we manage 2 active databases. One is the Allison Investor Database, which is literally a database of investors. We currently track a little over 3,000 investors across 10 different categories, including venture capital, private equity, big pharma, medtech, corporate venture capital, and of course, family offices and so on. We also have the Allison Business Development Database, which is a database of companies in the life sciences across all stages of development. And currently we track a little over 64,000 companies. So we sell these databases to our clients. And as you can probably expect, the investor database is primarily used by fundraising companies that are identifying additional investors for their fundraising efforts. We also have an education arm called Focus on Cures Accelerator, through which we provide customized education programs to various organizations, including accelerators, incubators, and other sort of tech hubs. And with that said, we do have a conference coming up in Boston, RESI Boston on September 25th, as well as RESI London in December 4th, as well as RESI JPM on January 14th during JP Morgan Week. So with that said, I'd like to invite Mike Liccardo from ShareVault, who will briefly talk about their platform. And thank you again for being a sponsor for this session.
Thank you, Claire, and welcome everybody. So ShareVault, we focus on the life science industry, and most of our customers are early stage small life science companies. One of the key problems that those companies face is how to protect all your confidential information that you're going to accumulate as you grow, as you get funding. And what we find is a lot of these small companies wind up having information that's highly confidential scattered in different systems. So what ShareVault allows you to have a document security and management system that can be used throughout the life growth stages of the company. Many of our companies use this for the due diligence process when raising money. They also wind up using us as a central repository in order to establish good controls and protection around their confidential information. The other thing that the ShareVault system does, it also helps to benefits life science investors, such as the people on this call, in working with their portfolio companies, because they want to feel confident that the information that's highly confidential that they've invested in, if you will, through that life science company is protected and controlled, so that it doesn't wind up in hands of unauthorized user. It also allows investors to have access to certain information with their portfolio companies to monitor progress and to be able to interact with the life science company. And I'll turn it back over to Claire.
I I'd like to start with a round of introductions. This introduction will include an overview of each attendee's firm, as well as brief introduction of their background, if applicable. Catherine, could we start with your introduction?
Sure. Thank you so much. And again, I'm glad to be here. And I've participated in many Resi events in person as well. Glad to be back. So just a little bit of my background quickly. I have 23 years of investments and finance experience. I've actually worked for 4 billionaire family offices and 10 family offices in total. So what happened is after my second billionaire family office, I realized that in some cases, they need an objective person on their board as an advisor, an investment committee, and that because some family offices vary in terms of their size and structure. And so it can help to have a person who brings you objective investment advice versus a private banker who only puts you into funds on their private banking platform. So I started that 14 years ago. And over the course of time, I've worked for one family office for 8 years continuously, and then some others on specific projects. For example, if they're needing to source specific kinds of investments. So today I am still working for several family offices, and I'm also getting them together to discuss investment opportunities and bring companies in front of them. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm really glad that I didn't know what a family office was when I got my MBA, but when I worked for my first family office, I thought, boy, this is a special group of people to work with that can really invest in products and services and technology that can help everyone.
Awesome. Ron?
Hi, Ron Paliotta from the Paliotta Group. We're a private investment firm based out of New York City. Mainly, we have other satellite offices. We support early stage startups through our ventures arm, and typically through 3 evergreen funds that focus on data-rich applications, such as digital assistants in highly technical domains. Also, we have a fund for sustainable business practices. And finally, and I think for the interest of this discussion, we also have a health tech fund, which focuses on affordable healthcare solutions, basically ways to reduce the out-of-pocket costs of healthcare to consumers, specifically in the United States. The way I summarize this is we don't want to cure disease. There are plenty of others who are trying to do that. What we want to do is to help patients treat their disease without going bankrupt. We take a very disciplined approach. Most innovations that claim to benefit patient care by lowering treatment costs, those savings never really trickle down and translate into lower out-of-pocket costs to individual patients. We're really selective about what we engage with, and we look for example tools that help us better diagnose or manage disease. So in the digital health space, data-rich applications and biometrics that can benefit from algorithmic computing, such as domain-specific AI engines in the genomic space. We also look for innovations that transform and streamline process workflows, scalable infrastructure at clinical backends. These examples of this is remote patient monitoring, using network-connected biosensors to seamlessly inform care providers about the progress of one disease. And finally, we also look for consumer-centric solutions that empower healthcare consumers to make better informed decisions about their treatment and about lifestyle choices. More recently, we've looked at digital assistants in these highly technical domains. We typically look for projects that can add value or complement our existing portfolio, and we'd like to stay within that sweet spot. But we also take an active role in projects. We look for long-term relationships in projects where we can actually add value beyond just capital, including by leveraging our internal expertise, both from a technical perspective and operational perspective. And we have centers of excellence built into our firm to help people with data analytics. And we also have a boutique consultancy in our firm as well.
Thank you, Ron.
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to meet you. My name is Shubhra Jain. I'm a physician by background. I trained as a primary care doc. I now lead the healthcare investments for our single family office. Tarsadia Investments, we're a single family office. We manage over $2.9 billion in assets across primarily healthcare, fintech, and real estate. And I lead the healthcare side of things for us. We invest directly into companies, pretty much like a venture or growth firm. We call it venture and growth practice. Pretty broadly across stages, we've done everything from a $5 million seed check to a $70 million pre-IPO check and everything in between. I am currently looking for all kinds of technologies related to data in biology and healthcare. Anyone who's generating new data assets, who's helping harmonize the existing data that exists in silos and is not being fully utilized to its potential, and just unlocking the value that we can realize from all of this healthcare data.
Excellent. Thank you. And last but not least, Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian. I'm a partner at Volcano Capital, which is a single family office with locations in New York City and San Francisco. The family actually made their money with a successful medical device startup. And so when they exited into GE Healthcare, they allocated $150 million to do direct investments in early stage medical device startups. And that's where we focused. Obviously, with their background, we consider ourselves value-added investors, like to be involved and active in the company and on the board and such. And then for me personally, I did come from a strategy consulting background. I worked at Bain & Company and Philips and their corporate strategy group prior to business school. And then I spent the last 14 years here at Volcano.
Awesome. Thank you all for the great introductions. So I'd like to first ask, and some of the panelists already addressed this, but it seems like there are some specific focus areas for all of these groups here. And so why do you focus on the areas that you invest in? What potential do you see?
What's interesting, because since I've worked for several families, I find that one, it's interesting that Brian just said about medical device exit. So one of the families, Nottingham Spurk, that I've been working with for 8 years, they do a lot of hardware investments. So for them, it's natural to stick with that focus. They're not biotech experts. But then for other examples of other families I've worked for, there was maybe a disease within the family or of particular interest in biotech and therapeutics. So they thought, I don't want to use my philanthropic dollars. I want to have a return on this too. I think there can be some specifics with the origin of the family, or there's a particular interest. Someone studied biology or genetics in school. So it does depend. But I think that's why sometimes they will stick to a particular area that they know well, because, for example, like what Brian said, it makes sense for them. They know the players, they had an exit, they know about distribution, because there are more than just the technology itself, right? It's how do you commercialize and make that business successful? And so I can understand why sometimes they would stick within their range.
And I think Ron and Brian already talked about their interest area, so I'll skip that. And Shubhra, you've also mentioned that you invest in like the intersection of data and healthcare. Why are you excited about that area? What are some exciting things that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, we just for the first time in history have more data available in healthcare and in biology than we have ever had before. And the main reasons for that are twofold. One is the implementation of electronic medical records during Obamacare, and that forced every provider to start capturing medical data that was sitting on pen and paper in files before. Now it has been long enough that everyone around the country has adopted it, and everyone is recording data electronically, and that data is available, logged up in those software systems. The second thing that has happened is the Moore's law drop in sequencing costs. So because the cost of sequencing the human genome has dropped by an order of magnitude and so quickly, sequencing has become democratized. There are more people able to sequence all kinds of nucleic acids, DNA, RNA, protein, all of that. And there is all of that raw data, which we only end up using 2% of the raw data that gets generated when we do a sequencing experiment. We throw away 98% because today we don't know how to interpret it. It's too cumbersome for a data scientist to do it manually. But all of this data, both on the clinical side and then on the omics side, is gold for AI models. It's not too cumbersome for them to be trained on it or to be able to interpret and digest it. for the first time in history, we have data resources available that didn't exist before. The second thing that has happened is the movement on the AI side has created a demand for this data because AI models need massive amounts of data to be trained on them. And with that demand comes a willingness to pay. Now, every tech company that's trying to build anything in healthcare or bio is looking for this data. The more general AI companies like OpenAI are looking for this data. All of the life sciences companies that are developing drugs have a much higher willingness to pay for this data because they are doing internal AI efforts that they need to feed the data into. So there's all this demand and willingness to pay. And so it's a simple moment in time where there is supply and there is demand. It's just a matter of being able to create a marketplace and match them. Now, I'm obviously oversimplifying it because it today doesn't exist in a shape and form that can be directly consumed by the demand side. So somebody has to come in, and that's where we feel there is a lot of opportunity for startups to come in and be able to transform this data into ways that will make it more usable and valuable to the demand side of the equation.
Can I just jump in very briefly? As long as we're talking about sensitive data within the context of healthcare, there is an emerging challenge about data privacy. And it's nice to have all that information available to you, but there's also regulatory and cultural shifts that are happening around companies to acquire your sensitive data, especially medical data. One of the things that we've been looking at that kind of related to this, we've been working with companies that are not in the healthcare sector, what are looking at creating smarter biosensors. Okay. These are new generation of sensors that have cognitive technologies directly built into their electronics. Some people call that on-device AI or edge computing anyhow. But what's happening there is that these new devices feature more streamlined machine learning algorithms on board that allow for safer, more trustworthy, more effective analysis, for example, to better manage noise. They also feature new chipset designs that can run cognitive models more effectively, that use less power when running on mobile devices. And the interest of those firms is, as far as data, they're really data agnostic. They don't care about the sector, as long as they have data on which they can validate the value of their new chip designs, etc. So the upshot as far as privacy is that in addition to creating new biosensing devices, new point of care tools that better serve satellite clinics and other resourced healthcare systems, new remote patient monitoring gadgets that can track clinically relevant changes of one's disease symptoms in real-world settings. These same devices also promote privacy by design architectures for sharing sensitive personal information. And these are the type of privacy protection practices that are essential, number one, for broader adoption of these gadgets into the healthcare system to supplement medical records, but also from a perspective of positioning startups for longer term success. They also encourage more individuals to share their data as feedback for fine-tuning AI models to improve the performance of new analytical product offerings. So we see this explosion in demand for data complementing the need for managing the privacy around that data, personal privacy around that data. So we've been looking at that very closely over many months now. And so I fully share desire for more information, more.
Excellent. So thank you for your insights, both. Let me jump into some pretty fundamental question, and I'm sure I actually sent out a poll earlier in this webinar just to get an idea of the demographic of today's audience, and it seems like a lot of people are involved with startups. And so I think a commonly asked question, and I'm sure you get asked this often, is how do you typically source investments? And I think everyone tends to family office operate very low key, and some of them do invest, their activities are very private. And so how do you typically look for new opportunities? And does that a lot of come from your existing network? Do you actively go out to external opportunities such as partnering conferences to source new deal flow? Just can you share a little bit more about how that process goes for all of you guys?
I'm happy to talk to get us started on that. So for us, we have really doubled down on the direct investing approach. We have historically invested in some funds, but we have pivoted our strategy to doubling down on direct. We have hired a full team. I have a team of 5 people. We work pretty much like a little venture and growth practice within our broader family office umbrella. So we do what any other venture or growth firm does, essentially, to source deals. We do some degree of thought leadership, we write content, we speak on organized conferences, and we also, the more senior folks on the team, have been in the industry for so long. I've spent my entire career in healthcare. I've always been on the direct investing side. So we've built networks and reputation in the sector, and we have on purpose gone out and hired such investment professionals to add to our teams so that they can bring their networks and their established reputations within the industries that we're investing in, and alongside the deal flow comes. So that's our strategy.
Anyone else want to chime in here?
So dissimilar on my side, I think we're pretty open to where we source deals from, a wide network of contacts, having been in the industry prior to setting up the family office, and then also myself over the last 14 years building up my own network. But referrals from existing portfolio company CEOs, co-investors, because every time you invest in a company, there's 4 or 5 other investors that are also looking at deals that kind of know what types of things you're interested in. It can even be early stage lawyers that can see a lot of deal flow, company formation, and that kind of stuff. And then we actually have invested in a company I met at a Resi conference. So I wouldn't discount the value of these face-to-face meetings and such as well.
Yeah, I agree. The meetings and conferences, especially where you could do the kind of speed dating, where you can meet a bunch of companies quickly, I think is very useful. It was interesting though, I had attended a lunch at the Pritzker Group in Chicago, and we were debating about how to communicate what you do. And there is this myth sometimes that, oh, you're a family office, you invest in everything. And that's just not true, right? So you'll get a real estate deal, and then you'll get like a hedge fund emailing you. And then part of it was, how do you control the message? And I think one of the things was, on the one hand, you don't want to open yourself up so you get every deal off the street. But on the other hand, the more clearly you can communicate, even on your website, exactly what you do can help. They don't do real estate, I'm not going to bother. Oh, they only do life sciences. So I think that communication method is really important, because every time I work with someone new, I communicate to my network what I'm looking for. And I think that really helps, because then they say, oh, I see you're focusing on that area. And that helps. So I think communicating really helps. But yeah, so much from previous families we did deals with, or VCs or things like that. So I think there's, to be to source deals, you need a broad network as possible.
One of the advantage of being actively involved with the portfolio companies as we are is that we can ask these entrepreneur teams who ideally would they like to see coming on board. So they serve as in the trenches advice or insight for us to see not only what sectors we need to pursue to help add value to our existing portfolio, but also who specifically individuals within that sector that we need to go and target. And like I said, I have no shame. If I see somebody that is doing excellent work, I will reach out and proactively try to engage with them, of course, through their investors as well. I don't think that we can discount the network available for you internally to guide you on specific individuals, specific teams that can add value longer term to your team, whether within an existing startup or maybe within an existing future startup. We heavily rely on the advice of our internal folks, and we trust their guidance.
Excellent. Thank you all for your input. So I'd also like to ask now, there are many investor types out there. Obviously, I think the most popular and dominant investor type is a traditional venture capital firm. And compared to a traditional VC, where oftentimes there are many LPs involved with their fund, family offices operate certainly on a different scale because a lot of money comes from the own family's wealth. So, with that in mind, what would you say are some of the implications of working with a family office on the startup point of view? And how is the way you operate perhaps different from working with a traditional venture capital investor?
I'm happy to get us started. So, very different. One, we don't underwrite for a 1 in 10 success rate. So, we're not looking to invest in a way where we are writing off 9 investments and hoping that one of them will be the next Uber or Google. It's not our strategy. So, we have a concentrated portfolio and only like to invest in very high conviction deals. So that's one, which means that what ends up happening is if you are underperforming, as almost every startup at some point in their life does, you will typically a VC or an angel would divert their attention, or at least the guidance generally is to divert their attention to the best performers and not pay too much attention to the underperformers because they're supposed to be a time suck. For us, it's the other way around. If you need something and if you're struggling through something, we roll up our sleeves and we double down to help you through it. We really take a very long-term view and we continue to partner with our companies throughout their journey. So the other difference is most VCs will invest in a particular round. They will have a definite amount kept to the side for as a reserve for follow-on investments. And at some point they will run out of that amount and they'll say, we are tapped out, we can't invest anymore. Yeah, so let's say you're putting a bridge round together, or even if the company is performing very well and you're continuing to raise more capital, at some point they'll say, we cannot have our entire fund concentrated into one investment. So everyone has a different threshold, but at some point they're going to be tapped out. So for us, that is very unlikely, right? We have $2.9 billion in invested assets. We will continue to double down if we believe that there is value to be created along the life cycle of the business. And we have real precedents for this. We invested in a business at Series B. We invested subsequently meaningful capital across each round, and then our public team took them public. That kind of journey would not be experienced at a typical VC firm. The other difference is because we invest from our own balance sheet and we are the decision makers, we can be very flexible and creative in deal structures. VCs will typically have a very plain vanilla standard documents approach, which might actually be good for you to do it with them that way. We can be more creative and flexible depending on what the situation is. So I'll take a pause there, but those are some of the ways in which we are very different.
And one thing I was going to mention is that there's a difference between a fund where they have LPs, right, with investors that they and shareholders they have to answer to. Most family offices, maybe they have to answer to the investment committee or other family members, but it's slightly different because they're not raising a fund every few years. They may have, it makes sense. And most smart families, and I'm sure all of my panelists will have some kind of investment policy statement or mission or some kind of mandate, right, outlined, but that can change over time. But a fund, what's in their offering memorandum, they have to stick to that. They're not allowed to have style drift. When a family office, if they decide to go in another direction, they have every right to do so. It's their decision. So that's kind of the difference with a fund, because they have to stick with what they have done, and they are limited in the amount of capital in that fund. When Subra said that a family office isn't tied to that, and it's a relationship game at the end of the day. I think Ron mentioned that, and I think that's very important because they have just the flexibility that a VC might not have, and that is a real advantage. And they can have longer term goals because funds need to have a return within that 7 to 10 year period. And sometimes those companies don't fall into that, especially in life sciences. We all know life sciences, some companies take longer than that. It's just the way it can be very expensive, but then very profitable when they exit. But you have to have that patient capital, which sometimes VCs don't always have, but some family offices can.
Excellent. Any additional comments?
I'll jump in. We take a longer term view. We've been around for approaching maybe 30 years now. So to us, investing is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And what we've learned is that when you invest in people, not in spreadsheets. So we have built-in mechanisms to foster talent without our portfolio ecosystem to prevent burnout. especially in the context of healthcare, where the status quo is incredibly resistant to change. So one of these mechanisms is what we call cross-pollination, where we encourage certain team members at certain times in their cycle to take internal sabbaticals, to transfer to another project within our portfolio, then return back to their project with newly acquired skills and hopefully with fresh insight that can benefit longer term execution toward their project goals. So it gives them a chance to recharge their new skills, build up or refresh their resume. Essentially, we want to retain that talent internally. We, like I said, we look at it longer term, and in certain market dynamics, such as the one we've seen recently, where there is a pullback in terms of investing, we see folks that need to reduce their burn rates while also generating value to us. So if we have a case where a project stalls due to no fault of their team, maybe from the persistent resistance by the status, maybe due to some regulatory change within their sector, we also have these external cross-pollination opportunities available, where they go into our business solutions practice, which is a boutique consultancy that essentially translates our lessons learned into better asset management procedures for clients. So we work with institutional investors on vetting their investment process to perhaps to rationalize highly technical domains during their due diligence. And also we work with other family offices, in some cases VCs, to re-examine underperforming assets for new opportunities, maybe to better segment patient population, to better understand the efficacy of a particular treatment. By offering these mechanisms internally, which many VCs, by the nature of their organizational structure, they really don't offer, we're able to retain that talent, and that talent helps us sleep better at night. And that's, I think, what people call longer-term outlook. It's not necessarily on the project, but the longer-term outlook is when you invest on the person. And that has served us well over the years.
And extending on the question of working with a family office, I think a lot of people in the audience probably, and this is another commonly asked question, is that how do you get in front of the family offices like yours? And also, I think it would be helpful for these companies to kind of get a sense of the typical due diligence process, starting from a company's initial outreach to your group. So whether that's through an introduction from your existing network, it could be a cold outreach to your email address. How does your due diligence process work? And maybe you don't have an answer for this because I'm sure it varies, but what's the window that you can expect from starting from the introductory outreach all the way to getting to that investment point? Brian, maybe you can start.
So as far as our process goes, I think we diligence everything that you'd expect, starting first and foremost with the clinical economic value proposition, but all the supporting stools underneath that as well. What's the regulatory pathway? What's the reimbursement look like? What are the value inflection points? How much capital do you need? What's the team look like? How's the patent portfolio look like? All the normal stuff. As far as trying to get to a timeline for a typical close, it depends a little bit on how comfortable we are with the specific area that the startup is. If it's a space that we know really well, and that just helps us be able to identify the opportunity really quickly and then diligence it with key opinion leaders we may already have a relationship with. I'd say it's been the 2-month range would be like the fastest we could really move. I'd say more typically it's in the 6-month range, just by the time you work through the process and negotiate all the legal docs, do all the diligence. It takes quite some time. And then on the outside where things really take a long time is when the deal hasn't really been decided on. And so if there's disagreements or changes along the way, multiple iterations of changing the deal terms and fighting over legal docs can really stretch it out and run up legal bills. And that's where you can get up into the 9-month range. And this is frankly not good for anybody if you get there.
If I could mention one thing, yeah, it's the worst thing when a company says, okay, but we're going to run out of money in 2 months. Nobody wants to hear that. So please come early. And also there's no harm in saying, what, I know you only invest in maybe revenue generating or FDA approved. But I just want to get in front of you now. Like, there's no harm, because people who are sourcing deals don't mind to see things a little bit early and then see how you progress. Because like Brian said, things could happen. It could stretch out over time, but also every family office is different. So one of the best things you can do as an entrepreneur, if you're trying to raise money from a family office, is to ask them. So what's your process like? Who are the decision makers? Because they can answer that question for you, because each one is unique. Some have investment committees that only meet once a month, and you have to get on that cycle. Others, it's very ad hoc. They could say, we could meet, I can bring the group together this Friday and we can make a decision. So each one is unique. And so you have to treat them that way. And there's no harm in asking them to outline that for you.
And I think, go ahead, Ron.
One of the things that I think is a challenge is not just getting in front of an investor. It's going through the process and actually getting funded. When you get in front of an investor, you went through a certain gatekeeper, that pretty generic gatekeeper that says, hey, these guys we might be interested in. You get into another cycle, which is different, making us decide to select you. Question is, why should we select you? Okay, what are the aspects of your project that distinguish it from many other very good ideas that we're also looking at? One of the things that we ask our guys is, you're coming to me with an idea. If the idea falls flat, maybe a competitor moves into your lane and you can't compete, what's your plan B? Okay, as entrepreneurs ourselves, we always know that there's something cooking in the back, a project that is not your primary project, a secondary project, maybe a tertiary project, something that kind of noodles in your, okay, that you will get to eventually. But right now you're focusing on selling me on this primary project. What we find is that many times the ideas that you have simmering in the back are much more interesting to us longer term. Why? Because the stuff that is simmering in the back is not the things that are hot today, but they might be the things that are hot a year from now. And what we do is we constantly re-examine and evolve our investment thesis. So we're looking at emerging innovation landscapes and new investment opportunities. So maybe right now, what your primary messaging to us is something that is not as attractive given other options that we have. But maybe it's something that you're working on in the back end, might be something that aligns with a direction that we're planning on moving. And you guys are at a disadvantage because we don't discuss those with you guys. So when you engage with an investor, or at least with us, I can only speak to myself, obviously, it's nice to communicate very clearly what you're trying to sell today. But in that discussion, try to broaden the horizon a little bit, and maybe share with them the things that you're thinking about and which might align with the direction that they might be moving 2 or 3 years down the line. So just throwing it out there.
This will probably be the last question. There are a ton of questions already, so hopefully we can get to at least a few. But I wanted to ask everyone in the panel, I'm sure that everyone, each of you has good wide network of other family offices. And so I'd like to ask, are there any trends that you see that are any interesting trends that you see regarding family office direct investment activities? And in your opinion, based on the people that you work with, do you see that there are more family offices that are trying to make direct investments into early stage life science and healthcare companies?
I can start us on that. I do. I think that the movement to making more direct investments is real in the family office world. Now, some of them feel more equipped and able to do co-investments alongside other folks that they know and respect, whether it's because they invested in those GPs or because they have just built relationships with those GPs over time and they just know and respect their judgment, and they may not be equipped to lead around, set terms, take board seats, or do their own diligence. They may not be sector experts, for example. That's the more broad trend that I see, but everyone, I think almost every family office does want to do more direct co-investments, except for some of the really massive ones, multi-strat ones maybe, that are just not equipped to be able to keep track of all the investments individually. I'm also seeing, I get actually a lot of calls from people who are in the family office world who are trying to double down on direct investment approach and go even deeper like we have chosen to. So the approach that we have taken is to limit our scope. So we only invest in categories that we have expertise in and that we know about, which is healthcare and fintech for us. So that's generally what we end up talking about, to limit your scope to things that you know, but then double down and go deep on them and not be afraid to do your own diligence. So I think it was also mentioned about getting to know them early. I think Catherine talked about this. I think that's really important because that is, for us, one way to do better diligence. People invest in trends, they don't invest in dots. So if you can get to know us early and show over time, build trust, deliver on what you say you would do, and give us that flexibility to due diligence, then that really helps us get there. So there's definitely a trend in moving towards direct investments. There's also a trend towards focus in terms of sector or stage. People used to be super broad. I will look at anything you send me. And now I'm hearing more and more people say, this is not my competency. This is not my wheelhouse. I'm going to continue to focus on my circle of competence.
Any other interesting insights or thoughts you have about family offices?
Really about relationships, and each one is different and unique. And so you can't assume that they're going to all have the same processes. But I do think that some family offices are looking more and more like their own internal VC fund or own internal PE fund. The difference being they don't have to fundraise, but I'm seeing also a lot of families hiring investment professionals who've worked at funds and institutions previously, because then they're already prepared. They know the process and everything. So I've seen that more and more happening today, and that they're poaching people from funds.
Excellent. So with that, we have about 10 minutes left, and I see that there are, again, many questions that people have been asking since the webinar started. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to go through all of them, but just going in order here, I'll start with the first question. So can you comment on the ROI of your family office investments, especially related to investments in startup companies developing pharmaceutical products? With this, I'm not sure if this question applies to many people in the panel today because there are several who don't invest in biotech, but anyone able to answer this or comment on this?
It has been really great for us. We seeded a business called Amneal Pharmaceuticals, which we still own 56% of. And we took $1 billion out when we took them public in 2013. So even after that, we own more than 50% of the business. So it has contributed meaningfully to the increase in our wealth and has boded very well for us.
I'll move on to the next question. So what is the panelist perspective on leading investments as a family office?
I mean, I can take that. It depends on your comfort level. If the requirements of that particular startup align with your core competence, then any family office would be happy, I think, to take a lead because they are the best position to understand what the demands are, what the opportunity is, what the challenges might be, and then they're positioned to address those challenges when they crop up. So it depends on if it's within our core competency, things like data analytics, then we will be more than happy to take a lead. But generally, if it's outside my core competency, it's not something that I would be losing too much sleep on. I might, out of courtesy, co-invest, but it's not going to be at a level of engagement that I think would be meaningful to a company. So I only work with and lead if I know exactly what's going on with that project. That's how I work.
Yeah, for lead as well, to the point where like we won't invest in a safe or a convertible note because we don't know what the terms are going to be that we're converting into. If we're already an investor, we will bridge to another round if it's necessary, but we won't make a de novo investment in a safe or a bridge. I think one thing is important to note though is family offices in general, it's very heterogeneous and difficult to make blanket statements. Some require someone else to lead, a healthcare investor. It's a lot of credibility in space. Some have to lead themselves. It's just all over the place. So you have to ask when you're thinking about putting together your syndicate.
Great. I will move on to the next question. So I know we were talking and focusing on direct investments here, but the question here is, does your offices invest as LP? What are your criteria, if so, and how can one contact you? Does anyone here make investments into other?
The answer to that, as far as me, is an absolute resounding. We have taken a long-term outlook in terms of developing our internal processes. And we would like to benefit from all that investment. And we do benefit from that investment. We will only engage under very restricted scenarios, other funds. We like, for example, to take an investment, help that team grow, and keep that team within our umbrella. And that generally does not align with others' perspective in terms of what investments in healthcare should look like. And rather than getting into a back and forth 5, 6, 7 years down the road, we're not going to engage. And we're going to take what we know and keep it to ourselves. So we're very limited in terms of, number one, engaging meaningfully with other finance guys. We're scientists, okay? We like the science. We benefit when the science advances, and we don't play any financial shenanigans in order to improve the valuation of the firm. Bottom line, the biggest asset for me is that my last name is on the firm's name, okay? And there's nothing that we're going to do to harm that name. And the Wall Street guys generally don't see eye to eye with me on that. So the answer is a resounding no.
And we addressed this topic a bit, but this question is about, they're curious as to whether or not a cold incoming pitch to a family office has any chance. And warm leads seem essential to getting any attention at all. I think in the discussion, we mentioned that you guys go to external partnering events and other networking events to identify what's out there. And so I think that kind of answers the question, but anyone want to kind of further clarify?
Yeah, I read my emails, so if you send me something, I will most likely look at it. I will say that I'm very busy. If it's a cold outreach that's not a good fit, I'm less likely to give it time or respond, and it's considered a way as if it came through a warm lead, to be totally frank. But happy to take a look, and if it's a good fit, I'm more than happy to follow up and have a meeting.
Yeah, I was going to say you can't discard cold emails, but make sure it's appropriate. And also don't write someone a novel. I don't want to read every detail, but if you can hone in on what you do and also what stage you are and what type of conversation, so industry, amount you're raising, stage, that is helpful, because if you make it too difficult and buried in the email, you're going to get ignored. But if you can succinctly put and know that investor looks at that, say, oh, I read an article, or I saw you on a cap table of a similar company, then it's going to catch their eye. And don't write pages and emails. They'll want to look at an attachment or things like that, but try to be succinct and direct if you do cold emails. But I think a warm intro is always better, but you may not know them. And so you do need to do that outreach, but just do your homework on who you're reaching out to. LinkedIn is also useful. Events like this are very useful.
The investor is trying to find the quickest way to get to a no, because there's an infinite number of ideas coming across your desk, and having the easy things to check off. Okay, yes, it is the right stage. It's the right check size. It's the right field or sector. It's the right whatever. And it makes it easy to say, yes, I completely agree with what Catherine said.
We have 1 minute left. Any final closing remarks that you want to share? Any helpful advice to the attendees who are out there, particularly startups who are actively seeking funding from groups like yours?
If you get the opportunity to meet with an investor, any investor, the idea is not only what benefit you provide to their portfolio, but also it's important for them to communicate what benefit they provide to you. Okay. One of the requirements, I think, is that the investor needs to position you for follow-on funding. And if they cannot do that effectively, then they're perhaps not the right investor fit for you. Remember, an investor is a partner, or an employee you cannot fire. So take your time, do your due diligence. I know that there's a burn rate issues and runway issues and all that good stuff, but you don't want to partner with somebody that doesn't align with your needs longer term. And once you found that investor, even if they say no, stay connected. Okay, there's a reason. There's a nuanced word in our world. It might be no for right now because I want to track how you're performing. Stay connected. We mentioned LinkedIn, and there are other mechanisms to stay connected. But remember, it's a longer term engagement. And if you go to a dance and the girl says, no, I don't want to dance with you, Right now, it doesn't mean she doesn't want to dance with you ever. Being persistent without being stalky is always nice.
I think all of your insights have been extremely helpful and gives a lot of guidance, especially to the fundraising startups here that are seeking to work with groups like yours. We're past the hour now, so I'd like to thank everyone for joining the session today. Thank you to all of the panelists today for joining today's discussion. I think I learned a lot from today's discussion, and I hope the audience did the same. And so thank you very much again for joining, and we will be organizing webinars like these on a regular basis, so hopefully everyone can join when they can, and look forward to staying connected. Thank you, everyone.